for doing so.
For sure.
I don't have any traffic on my YouTube, but I'll give you a link so that if you want to go back to reference it, you can.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. So what I normally do is when let's see if I can see this in the camera. I only see how there's a line for each of the.
Yes.
I'm not reading the entire profile. I'm just reading it from a line perspective.
For sure.
Which in and of itself can be a lot, but it's at least like stepping it down to the most easy to digest. So you don't overwhelm your brain. Now,
sounds good to me.
In the gene keys, the fourth line is called the server.
Okay.
So it's those who are of service to others. In human design, they call that the opportunist. I don't particularly like that word. I like networker or connector. But it's probably one of the most friendliest line numbers. It's like if you need something done, you know somebody who does that, or somebody knows somebody whose brother does that.
Yeah.
It's great to have that network and that connection with people. And it can also be the evolution is sort of what is your biggest challenge in life?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that is from where you're at now?
What's my biggest challenge in life?
Yeah.
That's a strange question. It's like I don't know. I would say, so I guess at some point I started my human design experiment and I was like, all right, so recently I've done, can I give you a little background?
Sure.
Solid. It's dangerous to ask an open throat with no identity sense of this kind of question. But basically, for background, I was, in high school and thought I was going to become a priest, and I was like studying with Jesuits, and I was like, getting all set to go off to basically seminary. When that didn't work out for a variety of reasons, and I ended up going to like a community college in San Francisco, making friends with a bunch of artists and actors, and being in musical theater for a couple of years. And then I went from musical theater to, on-camera stuff. And everybody thought that it was super cool, all the stuff that I was doing. They're like, oh my God, you're so like great. You're always like in some show. You're gonna like be huge, blah, blah, blah. But none of it was ever really appealing to me. I kept being pulled from one opportunity to the next by like virtue of being like, it was very much like when somebody was describing to me what it is to be a projector and what it is to be a fourth line, I was like, oh, that phase of my life makes perfect sense. It's weird because it wasn't what I wanted to be doing at all, but like I was definitely recognized every time I was on stage. Somebody would pull me into a new production before I finished the last one, and I'd have another job. When I stopped that to like run off to like France with an ex-girlfriend, like I experienced this like thing that somebody described as a thing that happens to 4/6s where they fall in love and they think it's going to be the most amazing thing ever. And they basically learn that the kind of investment that they are capable of having in another individual is not actually the kind of investment that they're meant to have, because it tends to damage the other relationships that they have, and it like sort of fucks up their network, which they will then probably have to rebuild. So I moved back to America, have to rebuild my network, and I find myself like with a group of people who are like, oh, you should go do all these things you told yourself you weren't going to do until these circumstances existed. And as a mental projector with no inner authority, the idea that I had told myself how I was supposed to respond to a certain opportunity before it showed up, and then being pressured by people around me who didn't recognize me at all into making those choices was also very typical, apparently. And I sort of like have disconnected from most of those relationships up till this point. Um, but before that, I found like yoga and I found a bunch of other things. I found this like really crazy typewriter job. And I went on this manifestation kick where I was like, okay, I'm going to come up with a crazy idea and see if it happens. And like it would happen within like 6 to 8 months, to the point where it was making people around me, the ones who I wasn't supposed to be around anyway, like kind of jealous and frustrated. Instead of happy for me that things were finally functional, they were like, no, you're supposed to do things the way that I'm doing it. Because I guess generators, they were like upset that I wasn't, my life didn't look like theirs. Especially, they were like 1-3s too. Like there were a lot of 1-3s who were upset about the way that my life was working, and it wasn't the way that they thought life was supposed to work. And then they'd ask me for guidance and then be upset by the things that I saw. And so I guess after all of this like random surrendering to, you know, the manifestation process, or surrendering to yoga, or surrendering to what life was just throwing at me, after choosing to do like different things as yoga, like at one point I chose to make the practice of my yoga, like the focus was joy. At one point it was non-belief. At one point it was just like radical honesty. I found human design through one of the generators, funny enough. That was like their sole purpose in my life was to bring me human design and then disappear, I guess. But they stuck around for a bit. But the most difficult thing, I would say, is the thing that it's like not really super difficult so much as it's just like strange. I don't know how to properly engage with like the whole networking aspect of myself, my design even, while honoring how I actually feel about it. Because if I honored how I actually felt about a lot of things before I got pulled into them in the past, I would have just said no. But like at this point, I'm like, okay, how do I create a life where I'm around the correct people in the correct environment? Because for me, it really comes down to, can you be in the right environment with the right people who allow you to, you know, like people who like validate you, recognize you, give you permission to do what you want to do, to, you know, honor what you're not trying to feel, to like support what you're trying to create, and where you guys are mutually beneficial in that way. Where instead of like surrounding yourself with people because you feel you have to, you guys are surrounded by people because you want to, and the people you surround yourself with help you create a life that you're happy to experience. That's basically where I'm at right now. Like that's the focus. It's not like hard or not hard. It's just like I'm watching.
Well, from what I see in the evolution from the fourth line is exactly what you're describing, love and community. And your gift there is teamwork in the 44th. The fourth line wound is about rejection. And the one thing that you have to be sort of aware of is that you do have an ability to manipulate and to come from a dark side or a corruptive side. And you have to be wary of overgiving more than people want from you, but you have to be able to set limits on what is okay, either energetically, emotionally, time-wise, as to what you can give, and stick with that. And the way it's healed is with gentleness. It's not going to be an overnight, switch. It's the patience and gentleness comes up throughout your whole profile, all over the place. I don't know how well. I am not.
Interesting.
Patience is not one of my personal virtues.
It's one of mine. I'm a very patient person.
Well, that's a good thing. And what you're describing, like the sixth, I don't know if you've gotten to that part of it yet, but um, the sixes always has three stages in life, and
Mm-hmm.
you have one, two, three, four sixes. So the first part of life is usually about trial and error, and usually it's error, what doesn't work, and
Mm-hmm.
it takes time for the sixth line um, to finally get to a place in life where you've made enough mistakes to have learned that, well, if I do X and X, that doesn't work. So I'm going to stop doing that and see how that.
Mm-hmm.
So for
Yeah,
about the
I've
next 20 years, that's going to be a lot of how you function.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've heard that before. The on the roof phase. And it's funny because I have a lot of friends who are 4 6s, and I've been telling them like a lot of us, so all of us are in this phase of we're not quite on the roof yet,
Yeah.
and we're getting closer to that, and we want to be there. Like we recognize, maybe because of the four in us, we all recognize what society needs or wants out of other people, and we want to show up as that, whether or not it's correct for us. Somebody once described us as 4 3s. It's like you actually have this transpersonal consciousness with like a subconscious, like personal line that is constantly like you're blind to yourself. And I was like, I'm not through this phase yet of, the threeness. But even now, I recognize that I have the same temptation you do to pretend that I am beyond all of that stuff. I want to pretend that I don't have the problems, that I'm not still making mistakes, that I have the right people in my life, that I'm in the right place, that I'm doing the right thing already. Like I'm so tempted to try to pretend that I'm doing that. And I need to be okay with the fact that even if it feels right, there's a good chance that I am not capable of recognizing if it is or not. And if you're 23 and you're a 4 6 friend, like I need you to recognize that, like, if you know that you're an amazing artist and you love making art, but you keep trying to be a life coach and a spiritual mentor to people, and nobody is buying your offerings, and people keep buying your art, and you keep trying to push art away, that maybe you should investigate art. But I mean, I'm not going to tell you that you have to do that. I'm just going to say that, like,
Right.
especially like because this person is like a generator, and I'm like, especially as a generator with a emotional wave, and you keep going up and down and you're back and forth on it, but you have a sacral response, and you keep running to art, but you keep not focusing on it because you want to do something else. You're resisting it, and each time you tell me why you're resisting it, it's mom, it's something, you know what I mean? It's somebody else. It's the influence of somebody else. It's like you're literally telling me that you've been conditioned around your art, that you can't enjoy it as work, but you're running around fighting to do all these things where people are not recognizing you and are rejecting you. And I don't understand that either, right? Like I feel like you can't be correct if you are suffering as much as you are with this experience. Suffering is not supposed to be it's not none of the keynotes of your chart that I've ever seen are suffering, friend. So like, I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A turn on you can lead a horse to water. I was in landscaping, and we used to say you can lead a horticulture, but you can't make her think.
Oh my gosh. That is ridiculous, but hilarious.
So the sixth line, the wound is isolation,
Mm-hmm.
and healing that is um, has to do with care. A great deal of self-care from yourself, but also your network and allowing others to care for you or help.
Can you repeat
The
that?
shadow with the the wound is isolation, and
Isolation.
isolation is healed through care. By care, it means a high level of self-care and also care from others. You have this network on your conscious side, so it's allowing to receive care from others or help. One, I'll tell you a quick little self-projected projector story that I have. There's a real young guy, was totally in not self, knew nothing about this stuff, and he kept talking to himself and mumbling. I was like, at first I was thinking, he had some schizophrenia or some serious mental health issues, and then I did his chart and saw that he was a self-projected projector. So he was speaking and not even knowing that he was speaking his thoughts out loud.
That's really interesting.
Really interesting.
Huh.
And my gene key twin is also a self-projected projector. She has the same birthday, and the first 4 keys are identical.
Interesting. Okay.
So let's go. Now, are you familiar with the path other than the first 4?
No, I'm not.
The second part of it is I just finished the 6-month deep dive, and it was the second time I've done the Venus sequence.
Okay.
But the Venus is how it is you love and how you connect with people. And it also goes into the developmental stages of what made you you.
Okay.
So the purpose key has 2 different sort of explanation. It's your purpose in life. By that it means not what you do, it's just how you be in life. And there, your gift is mindfulness. But the second aspect of it is it's also your purpose in relationships. As you go into the 6th line with regard to relationships, has to do with sort of like what the cells of your body. For me, I'm a first line, so it's like the bones. For you, it would be so it does have an effect on your physicality. The next sphere is called the attraction sphere. It's what people find attractive in you and what draws people to you. And that is the only place you have a first line. The first line has to do with, it can be very fruitful or it can be very sterile.
Is that the 6th one?
The 6th one.
6.1? Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Your gift there is diplomacy. So you're the one that can settle the argument and do it in a way where, you're not totally pissing off everybody.
What's attractive about you? Diplomacy, baby. Diplomacy.
Yeah.
Said, what's attractive about you? Oh, diplomacy, baby. What do I do with this?
Well,
I should sit in corners and just wait for people to argue.
There's conflict in every place, in everything in the world. So, but it has to do with honesty, and ones generally are like the foundations of knowledge. So as your 6 matures, that knowledge will become more and more of an attractive feature of you. Now, the next sphere is the IQ. Most people are familiar with the term, IQ. It's the last developmental stage from about age 14 to 21.
Mm-hmm.
And there you have sixth line. And the way your mind works is it's an objective mind. And it can also, the shadow side of that can be kind of absent. With the sixth line, the shadow can be also arrogance or aloofness.
When we talk about the shadow of the objective mind as absent, arrogant, or aloof, so sometimes when we get keywords from, Rudd or Roth, I feel like they don't actually mean exactly what the word means, like in a colloquial context. So if we were to say the shadow of the objective mind is absence or arrogance, does that mean something specific in Gene Keys, or is that just the typical colloquial, oh, you're a distant person?
It's more, yeah, it can be distant because your mind thinks of things in a very objective way. And if it, I guess, of interest, you're more, I don't know how to explain objectivity.
If
something is right, I guess, and fits within your mental scope.
Let me take a crack at this.
Does that kind of clarify or no?
You kind of cut out, but so for example, I discovered when I was 27, I think, that I should not tell people stories the way that I tell people stories, because people have a tendency to assume that you are being biased in your own favor. And I have a tendency to attempt to be particularly fair. So I'll be like, oh, from the other person's perspective, there's a good chance that I was doing X, Y, and Z. And so if a person hears that out of me, they go, oh, so you thought that this person didn't recognize that they might be hurting your feelings. And I was like, but be talking about a person who was actually emotionally abusive to me, right? And they will think that it probably wasn't as bad as I'm describing it to be if I could take a moment to be empathetic and understand that they did not realize they were hurting me, even though I'm like, no, this person was actually emotionally abusing me. They were going out of they were gaslighting me, for example. They would just tell me that things that I had said were not being said, and they would tell me that things that they had said had never happened. And I would make a point of keeping track. I would go and I'd be like, no, I wrote this down. I made sure that I asked you to repeat it so that I could write it down, so I could look at it another day and make sure you said it. So when my friend realized that I was explaining these things about this other person in this way, and he's like, oh, wait, oh my God, no, you're this is a horrible relationship. Why are you with that person? I was like, well, everybody's been telling me that I'm not, it's not as bad as I think it is. And they were like, no, it's way worse than I ever understood it to be. And it's like, well, why? And he's like, well, I just assumed you were being favorable to yourself. And I was like, no, I was trying to be fair to them because they weren't there to represent themselves. And that is a fascinating thing that occurs. Yeah, that's a thing that occurs. Because I recognize, for example, I'm a human being, so I can't help but be biased. There's no unbiased human being, right? And so when we have conversations about anything, we can't even help but be biased by the way that we use language. The language that we have biases our vocabulary in favor of X. If you're an American, for example, speaking English, we have a tendency to talk about things in violent terms. We'll talk about, oh, we're going to war with terrorism, or we're battling illness, right? It's not like we are working on relaxation and recovery. We are battling illness. It's this person is laying in a bed. Why are they battling illness in a bed? It's sure, their immune system might be fighting off the disease, but their conscious being that's not what it's doing. Their conscious being is trying to find peace, relaxation, de-stress to like raise the immune response, that's not the same. But like when you talk to people about things like that, they don't really grasp it, I guess, perhaps because I think the nature of words is even fundamentally flawed. To say what something is to say, it's to define it against what it isn't, which at the same time connects it to the thing that it is not, right? So it's like there's like the dualistic perspective of wrong and right, right, good and bad. But then there's also like the translogical perspective of like good creates bad and therefore good is bad, and bad allows for good, therefore good is purposeless, non-existent without bad. If you didn't have these things to define against each other, you wouldn't have the human perspective of recognizing either. That is to say that they could very well not exist if we decided to live in a world where humans did not recognize good or bad, and they chose to use different descriptors. So it's like, yeah, I can recognize how, like, for example, I can seem very emotionless when I'm engaging with people about problems because of this. I'll be like, okay, so how do you want to look at it? Do you want to look at this from a place of there is good and bad, or do you want to look at this from a place of like, this is my experience of it personally and it's positive, or this is my experience of it personally and it's negative? And if a person can't give me their own emotional preference on it, then I'm like, if you're not emotionally connected to it, I don't actually see a reason to engage with it, which could also, to some extent, be its own kind of like, you know, aloofness, absence, arrogance. It could almost be perceived as arrogant to be like, I'm not going to engage with you if you have no emotional connection to this. And I'm going to distance myself from you if you have no emotional, you're a waste of my time if you don't have an emotional connection to the problem you're talking to me about, which is like weird. But I definitely did that to somebody recently. So I'm thinking about that and I'm wondering like, oh, what was that?
Well, the gift within the key that you have there is synergy.
Is it synergy or synergy? Is that the synergy one?
Synergy.
Okay.
Now, EQ is for the intelligence, EQ is for emotions. And that usually develops, from about age 7 to 14. And the way this works is it starts with, 21 to 14 and works backwards to birth. So your EQ, you have 2 line ones. This is the second one.
What's the gate on that?
The 53rd.
53.1. Okay.
And the positive side of the foundational stuff in the emotions is self-esteem. And the negative or shadow side can be self-sabotage emotionally. And the gift there is expansion.
Okay.
I don't know the 53 very strongly. That's, something to, as you work through this, to learn more about. The shadow is, I don't even like to even go into the shadow. I first look at the gifts, and about 80% of when I study for myself, focusing on the gift portion, aware of the shadow, but a lot of people tend to focus all their energy on the shadow side. So I try to focus the other way. The SQ, the next sphere. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to crack open genetic matrix for a quick second and see if I could find a thing, because my gene keys is not opening. But I was going to ask for synergy. So do they give a description at all of the breakdown of synergy, or is it just like synergy, like things functioning well together? Like that doesn't.
Well, the big book does, and Rosie has something called. Uh, she breaks down the gene keys into um, a parable story, which helps to really understand all three words.
Mm-hmm.
We can circle back to that one after I do the lines, if you like.
Okay, yeah, sure.
The SQ is sort of like your soul quotient or spirit quotient, and there you have the 55th with the sixth line. I'm very familiar with the 55th, it's my radiance.
Okay.
So the sixth line there has to do again with patience. And it's in parentheses time and space.
Okay. What line was this? A six?
Six. Yep.
Okay. Cool.
And 55 can affect like anyone. You can be a victim of any one of the shadows of any key. Like you can be a victim of dominance, which is the shadow of the IQ, and the gift is synergy. But the way that is healed is through self-responsibility. By that I mean your emotions, etc. are we. Well, let me make that personal. I like to put blame outside of myself. Okay, you said such and such made me feel this way. They didn't actually make me feel this way. It's by whatever thought, and it's putting the blame outside of yourself for your life circumstance, for your feelings, for your thought process. But as I bring it inward and look at, my own choices around things and take responsibility for things, you start to step out of that victim mentality. And that's huge for everyone. The last key is like the purpose key. It is your core wound as well as vocation, which goes into prosperity. So the core wound again is a 4, which is rejection. But as you flip it towards the pearl, it's about sales and connectivity.
Interesting. Is this the 44.4?
This is the 20.4. They call it the vocation, the end of the Venus sequence and the beginning of the pearl portion.
The 20, did you say 24.4?
20.4, 20.
Oh, 20.4, okay. Cool.
It's the gift of self-assurance.
Okay.
And I've been doing human design and gene keys for about 4, maybe a little longer, 4 years. And I've yet to study the pearl sequence. Richard's going to be doing this fall, starting a deep dive into the pearl. But I'll give you what shot and knowledge I do have.
Sure.
The pearl is relating to, you have the 33 in your culture and your purpose. In the culture, it's a first line, which is about individuality. And it's about mindfulness is the gift there. the Pearl, you have a fourth line, which is all about connection and community, and the line there refers to charity. And the gift there is leadership. And as you've figured out that as a projector, it's knowing others and guiding them, and it's developing the skills of leadership. And mindfulness.
Okay.
So that's about it, as Bugs Bunny would say.
Okay. Cool. Nice.
Resonance for you, or
I'm looking at so basically, as you talked about this, I was kind of loosely checking to see like which placement was creating that. So it's like, the last two were like Jupiter placements were like 33.1 and 31.4. Right. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. I don't know how they like align with the gene keys themselves, because I haven't been able to figure out how to get access to my little gene key chart thing that I bought I don't know when I bought it, but I don't have a receipt for some reason. And it pops up on my phone, but it won't pop up on any of my emails, which is a little concerning to me.
But a lot of times it comes in either the spam or do a search in your mail for gene keys.
Mm-hmm.
I had that problem for a little while too.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, I see this partially, but not entirely. My computer's going a little slow though. You said it might be in spam?
I usually just put in a keyword search for gene keys, and it'll pull up what goes in spam and promotions and.
Okay. Here we go.
Let me stop want me to stop the recording?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, hold on.